Module 4 is all about perception. Your brain is working really hard for you behind the scenes in picking up data and interpreting it. It's not always a perfect process, though. Let's look at two elements, selection and organization. Would it be possible for you to count the black dots in this diagram? This isn't a changing image. It's a picture. It's a JPEG. But just because of the way the colors are arranged, your eye has trouble picking up whether those dots are white or black. So what it does is it kind of is waffling, and it presents them in different places all the time. So the picture isn't changing at all. It's your mind that is changing its mind. So this illustrates a concept of selection. It can't quite pick up what's accurate, so it kind of fills in the blanks and just makes up what it needs to complete the diagram. And on to organization. Take a look at the diagram below. If the first thing that you looked at was the A, you probably in the middle read that as ABC, because your brain would have started with A and done an immediate flash to, oh, ABC, this is the alphabet. However, if you started out by seeing the 12, if that caught your eye first, you probably read the middle as being 12, 13, 14. In a flash, your brain decided, oh, this is numbers. So it filled in the blanks. So in that split second, when you first looked at it, you had an impression of what was in the middle. And that's an organizational tool. Your brain has organized categories, one of them being numbers, one of them being letters, and it kind of fills in the blanks. So this filling in the blanks happens all the time because you don't get complete data and you don't have complete stories. So lucky for us, we don't have to sit and agonize about things. We let our brain do the work. Do we do this with people? Well, yes, we do. Again, every time you meet a person or have an interaction with a person, you don't have time to analyze everything they say or everything they do. So we kind of move into judgment mode, and we organize those perceptions. Our brain does. So we use perceptual constructs, just like ABC or 1, 2, 3, but for people it's more things like physical constructs. What do they look like? Role constructs. What do they do, or what is their role in relation to us? Interaction constructs. So what are their interactions like? How do we perceive the interaction in the moment? And then psychological constructs, which are perceptions or things from the past, ideas that we've had or groupings that we've built. So those using those categories helps us to quickly interact with people, but it can also have the downside of shaping generalizations that are stereotypes. So if you've had a certain type of interaction with people in a certain way, then that becomes a psychological construct, and you're going to carry that on. So if you were working in childcare settings and you worked with a couple of affluent families, people who were rich, and they were really demanding and difficult to work with, you might start thinking, oh, people who have money are so difficult to work with. So a person might come into your center, appear to have some money, and have a very simple request that any parent might make, and you would think, oh, here we go again, right? One of those rich parents, and they're so bossy. So it's important to kind of have those groupings, but you have to be careful to realize that every member in the group is unique. They're not all the same. Another interesting idea in your text about perception is called punctuation, and that tells you you're never really quite sure where an incident happened. So this shows you sometimes if someone is nagging at you, you'll withdraw. They respond by nagging more, you withdraw, right? But who says it started with the nagging? Maybe, first of all, you were withdrawing, you weren't doing something, someone started to nag you, and that's when the cycle started. So you'll find that this is very true when you're working with children and you're not sure what came first, the taking of a toy or the hoarding of a toy, right? So it's never quite as simple as it seems. So as we are perceiving things, we're always in the process of interpretation. And how we interpret things depends on our degree of involvement in the situation. How much do we know about it? How invested? What kind of relational satisfaction? Is this a positive experience where this is someone who you feel kindly toward? Past experiences. What's happened to you in the past that's been like this? How do you assume that humans behave? What are your expectations in the situation? And what is your knowledge of that particular other person or others in general? So as you read through your text, you can see how much all of those can vary and how they can impact your interpretations. Your text also talks about how you negotiate perceptions. Remember that perception is not a solitary activity. You are picking up information from the other person and trying to view it in their eyes. So those exchanges of stories are called narratives. Sometimes your narratives clash where you think, well, that isn't the way I saw it at all. I don't think it happened that way. There isn't one of us that hasn't had an argument with someone we work with or a significant other where you think, I did not say that, you said this, right? That's a clash of narratives. However, we also have shared narratives. So sometimes we see things together. We also have a lot of physiological influences, and this should remind you of the information we had earlier in the course about noise, about how noise is a big part of our perception process or our communication process. So how well are your senses taking in information? That could be due to age, health. How are you feeling in the moment? Are you hungry? Do you have a biological cycle that's interrupting or influencing your perception? So when those things are off, they actually will create that noise that makes it difficult to pick up data or to work with it. The mood totally influences how we view people and events, and I know you know that as well. Just when you think about going into work with children in the morning, if you're really upbeat and you're feeling great, having a good day, a lot of things might appear to be kind of funny, or a child does something and you'll think, oh my goodness, look at that. If you're in a really bad mood, it's not so funny anymore. You'll think, oh, look at that. I'm going to have to clean up a mess now, right? So everything becomes flavored by your mood. Also, your self-concept plays a role in how you interpret others' behavior. If you perceive yourself as always being picked on or taken advantage of, if someone makes a simple request to you, you might feel like, oh, here we go again. Everybody's telling me what to do, right? So your construct of yourself plays a role in how you perceive things. We talked a little bit a moment ago about some social influences. Standpoint theory says there's always a difference in perspective between the haves and the have-nots. Also, sex and gender roles make a difference. So what do we expect from people that are masculine, feminine? Now we're more aware of a category that you might call androgynous, right? So not exhibiting strong messages about gender, but also undifferentiated. People who aren't, when you're trying to make an interpretation and there isn't much information coming. We're also influenced by occupational roles, and in your text you'll be reading about that, a researcher named Zimbardo. So if you are talking to a physician, you're going to perceive what they're saying differently than if you were talking to the person who's picking up your garbage. And that's just, those are due to constructs we've made. Cultural influences, and throughout the course you'll be noticing how much culture influences communications, and perception is no different. What we notice and what we think of things has to do with culture. Your text also goes on to talk about talk and silence. So our comfort level and how much silence is there makes an influence on perception. Social obligations, so the social world being a huge impact on perception, and also your own style of thinking and logic. And the text goes into individual versus collectivist thinking, and that's something that we've always thought differentiates us in a way as Canadians compared to Americans, for example, is that we tend to think more about more in a collectivist way, what's good for everybody, as opposed to in an individual way. However, there's other countries that go far further on the collectivist way of thinking than we do. There are common tendencies and perceptions. So while you're working through the text, be honest with yourself about whether some of these really apply to you, and try to notice times that they've influenced your perception. One is we judge ourselves more charitably than we do others. So when we do something, we're quite generous with ourselves. Well, sure, I was late for that, but I had a reason, and this happened, and whatever happened. Whereas if someone is late and we're waiting for them, we're probably not going to be so generous. A self-serving bias is also something that commonly happens, and that's where we're really happy when we're successful to say, yes, I did it. But if something we've done is a failure, we like to mention everybody else that's part of the failure, or maybe even remove ourselves from it entirely. So it's a common tendency. Doesn't mean we should do it, but it's a tendency. We're influenced by our expectations. So if we expect someone to be a kind and charitable person, anything they do to us or do around us, we think, oh yes, well, they're a nice person. If we don't expect a person to be kind and generous, we may not experience it the same way. We might think, oh, that's odd, I can't really believe they're being generous, because they're really not that generous of a person, right? So we take that away from them. Influenced by the obvious. So what's obvious to you and what's obvious to me are very different things. So an example might be if my husband and I pull into a parking lot and there's a woman standing by a vehicle. He's probably going to notice the vehicle, or I hope that's what he notices. I might notice her shoes, right? So what's obvious to us is related to what we're interested in. We cling to first impressions, and usually that if we have a positive first impression, we'll create something called a halo effect. So we had a very positive first impression of a person, and after that we cut them slack. We continue to view them positively. Unfortunately, that's often caused by physical attractiveness. So a person looks good, maybe is dressed well, gives an image, a positive image, because what you see comes to you before anything you've heard or anything like that. So that can give them an advantage. We also assume that others are like us, and that also can lead to problems because, of course, others aren't. So remember, these are tendencies. It doesn't mean you have to keep doing them. You should be questioning all of these things. Question whether it's fair to rate someone according to a first impression, or to assume that someone is like us. I know there's days when I have not been at my very best, and if a person met me on that day, would it be fair for them to always have a negative kind of impression of me? So one way that your text will talk to you about perceiving others more accurately is to give them some feedback and check that perception out. So perception checking involves describing a behavior you noticed, then giving 2 or more possible interpretations of that behavior, and then giving a request for clarification about how to interpret the behavior. So people might question this and might say, well, why do I have to give two interpretations? Why don't I just give my interpretation? Well, the reason is if I'm not really in a mood to clarify what I'm doing, or if I'm kind of not fully engaged in a communication, if someone says to me, I see you look tired this morning. Didn't you get enough sleep? Chances are I might just go, yeah, I didn't. I'm just going to agree with that because I really don't feel like talking about it. But if a person says, well, you're looking kind of tired, I'm wondering maybe you didn't get enough sleep, or maybe something's bothering you. Can you tell me what it is, which it is? Then I would feel like, okay, now I have to commit to, it really wasn't that I wasn't sleeping. Something is kind of bothering me. So it pushes me in the direction of having to be clear, and I don't get that easy out of just saying yes, or saying, getting rid of the person's request. So your text will guide you through more of this. Another way of perceiving others more accurately is to build empathy with them. So if you can recreate their perspective, that helps you to realize they're not the same as you. You shouldn't expect them to be the same. You shouldn't be dragging in your own thoughts into it. You want to try to picture what their thoughts are. So that requires that you can take their perspective, that you can, to some degree, experience some emotional contagion, pick up their emotion and be able to experience it, and also that you have a genuine concern for that person. You can see how this is really important when you're working with children and families, to be able to build empathy and to be able to try to understand where they're coming from. Empathy is a valuable tool. For the recipient of the empathy, it helps them to build self-esteem and makes them feel comfortable, builds trust. So again, that's so valuable for the families and children that you work with. It's also really good for us, right? It helps us to make connections. If you have empathy toward people and you can demonstrate it, it also helps them to act morally. If you show to a child that you're going to understand them and understand why they do certain things, they're more apt to tell you the truth about what they've done, right? Or to be more open to hearing about what they maybe should have done differently. So in order to feel empathy, you need to be open-minded. You have to have some imagination and a sense of commitment, right? I'm going to sit here and I'm going to work through this with the person that I'm communicating with.